So I have my needle threaded with a very long thread, and there are 3 strands of thread that I've threaded through my needle. And I'm going to use this to create Tailors Tacks. And Tailors Tacks is a method of transferring information from one layer down into another layer or several layers. So what I've got here is the top end or the open end of what was my pillowcase. I've used the other section of fabric for another demonstration. So I have 2 layers of fabric here, and I've just marked out with my pins a very straight line, and I've used my tape measure to just make sure that it is straight, but I've also measured it from my cut edge. And this could represent a line of hemming that you plan to do on a skirt or a pair of trousers if you're making changes to the hem. Now I've got my cut edge, I have my line marked, which would be the fold line. So this line would be where I would turn up my seam allowance or hem allowance for that type of application. Okay, we can use this for many kinds of applications. Just remember that Tailors Tacks are used to transfer information from one layer to many layers below. Now I have my padded workbench here, and when I go through with the needle, I don't want to go all the way through. If you have a hard surface, that's great. So you can use card paper, stiff paper, something that's not going to allow the needle to go through. I'm just going to use a file folder. Now this is perfect. This is perfect. It's very similar to pattern making paper that you can buy that tailors use to make master patterns that they use over and over. So it's very similar. I'm just putting that underneath so I don't go into my tabletop. Now I'm going to begin at one end, and I'm going to go to the other end, and I'm going to leave long tails of fabric in between each stitch. So I'm going to go in where the pins are and remove the pin and leave 10 centimeters or thereabouts length. Now the length very much depends on how many layers of fabric that you want to mark. You should leave about 2 centimeters per layer. So if it's a little bit longer, that's great. If they're too long, they become a nuisance and they get in the way. So just bring your needle, your threaded needle, all the way through all of the layers. Now here you have to kind of control your thread. Now whether you choose to lay your thread up or down is up to you. I'm doing it up so that you can see what I'm doing in the frame here. Okay, so I've just taken the pin out. I can still see the pinholes, and I'm going to go through, and I'm cutting each section as I go through. You don't have to. You can loop it from one stitch to the other and cut it afterwards, such as what I'm going to show you now. So you can leave thread and then go right into the next stitch and do the next stitch, and then just leave your loops and straighten them out later, and you can cut them later. Alright, so and then you just carry on with whatever you are trying to mark. So the next step would be, I'm not going to mark all of this, but you can see where I'm going with this. The next step is to actually start cutting these layers. Now I actually have more than 2 layers. I just didn't show you. I actually have 1, 2, 3, 4 layers of fabric. So I've left enough length here to mark 4 layers of fabric. And just straighten them out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my scissors to go in between, and I'm going to go behind and catch 2 loops and pull them forward. And I'm going to watch what's happening to the tails here, and I'm going to leave about 1 centimeter of fabric above, or thread, sorry, and 1 below. I'm just going to zoom in so you can see what's happening here. So leave that amount, then go underneath and cut the thread about the same length as what you've left at the top edge. Okay, so now it's completely separate and you've got 1 mark. And I'm going to follow and do the same thing with each of my layers. So now you can take your time to do this. If you do it in a rush, or what I find has happened, if you do it in a rush, you end up pulling the thread out completely and you've lost your mark. Okay. Now I've gone 1 layer. Now I'm going to do that, follow through with the 2nd layer. And I just repeat what I've done with the 1st layer and do it with the 2nd layer. So in this demonstration, what I'm doing really has very little context for what I would be doing in the future with it. But it does give you an idea of what Tailors Tacks actually do and how they can help you, because there's no marks that are left behind after the thread gets pulled out. It is as if they were never there in the first place. Okay, and that's my 2nd layer, or my 3rd layer actually, and then I have this final layer here, which is the under layer. So you can see there are the loops there. Now I could leave the length here, or I can just trim it away. I have enough here to do at least 1 other layer. But let's just clean this up. I have 3 strands of fabric, or sorry, I keep saying fabric, 3 strands of thread for this because it holds in the weave better. Now you can use more strands if you wish. 4 is probably good. 5 is probably pushing it a little bit, but now you have marks all the way through every layer. Now I'm going to show you another way of actually putting the Tailors Tacks in, which would give you better hold if the weave was that much looser in the fabric. This weave is not really that loose. It's a rather tight weave, but if you had a looser weave and you wanted to have more layers of thread, you can go through twice. Let me just take this pin out. And just go through twice there, and now you have twice as much thread without having to thread the needle with, what would that be? 6 strands. Okay, so I'm just going to go through and do a back stitch where you went through, and this will give you more thread through fabric that would be of a looser weave, where there's, whoops, there it goes, pulled it out, where there's danger of pulling it out, just like that. Okay, I'm just going to go through again and pull my needle and cut the thread. Now I have twice as much thread going through, but the process is exactly the same. You pull it through so you can control how much you are pulling through, and do it layer by layer rather than going through one spot and doing every layer and then going through the next stitch. Do a row of marks. You'll see how practical it is, or how viable it is to do Tailors Tacks. If you find that when you're lifting the fabric and you're losing the thread, then stretch out how many you do before you lift the next layer. Okay, so now I'm just going to remove these pins, and I'm going to remove these pieces of fabric inside, which really don't mean anything in this application, but I've marked it in any case. So this could be a hemline that you're marking. So I'm just going to clean this up here. The next, if it were a hem, what I could do next then is turn this up and crease it along those Tailors Tacks. And that would be where my hemline would be. Now how you finish a hem is another video entirely, because there are so many ways of finishing hems, but this is an excellent way to mark hems for skirts and especially for trousers, because trouser legs are narrow and you can get through many layers without disturbing your line, and you can turn it up like so and just mark it with your, or hold it with your pins for your next step. Now, Tailors Tacks are great for marking hems, but also for marking darts or marking meeting points. In assembling pattern pieces together, or pieces of fabric together, quite often there are points that you need to match up with, match points or meeting points, and you can use a very similar technique. You can use the Tailors Tacks, or you can actually use something more specific to making meeting points, which I will show you as well. Okay, so now here we have our hemline that is turned up, and I can take it to the next step, whether I press it or finish the edges first, which is another video. So we begin by choosing a point, and if it is a point, we should identify that as an end point, or where two lines cross over. Okay, so I'm going to go down, right, along the center point, and bring my needle through all the layers of the fabric. Let me just get a close up here so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm bringing down my needle through all of the layers of fabric and bringing it back up and leaving quite a long tail. There's a crossover point here, and I'm going to take it through and bring it out again, and I'm going to leave another 8 centimeters of thread. Okay, so now I have 4 strands of thread. Okay, we'll just leave that there for now. And then, now that's for a crossover point. Now I'm going to follow what will be my sewing line and just pick key points. Wherever the line changes direction is where you bring another length of thread out. So you can see this consumes a lot of thread, but it doesn't leave any marks, and I have enough here for one more. Bring that through, and so you can see these long tails here. I have another needle threaded, ready to carry on. And then on the other side of the dart, or the other seam line of the dart, is here. And I'm going to create a corresponding tailor's tack right across from it, so that when I fold my dart in the middle, that I can put these marks back to overlap. So where I have the first ones, I'm going to cross over and put, it's like a mirror image of the first. So now I'm going to need to re-thread. So I'm going to one long thread and my second thread. I don't need to knot this, I just need to thread it through the needle. And I have two more. Okay, now I have all of my sewing line marked with Tailors Tacks.